Hello, welcome to On the Bauble Podcast Episode 1. I'm your host, Tsubasa J. Ueda, and joining me today is Yuki Lee Bender. Today we'll be discussing the Uprising Seal format to help you get ready for the upcoming skirmish season. So, a little bit about myself. I've been playing Fab since the middle of Monarch, and actually Yuki got me into the game essentially saying that there's a RTN for 2021 coming up, and she's like, "This game's easy, so get into the game." And she trapped me into the game.
So I'm Yuki. I come from playing Magic the Gathering, but I've been playing Flesh and Blood since like late Crucible era, and just kind of got into the game by watching LSV on YouTube. And since then, I played in a variety of events. Played at Canadian Nationals 2021, which I ended up winning. That's probably what most people know me for. I also top 32 the Pro Tour New Jersey. Generally, people know me for playing Lexi, but I actually consider myself a limited player first and foremost. And in Magic the Gathering, the game that I come from, I was primarily a limited player. So that's like kind of really where my passion lies, although I do enjoy constructed as well.
Yeah, so the 2021 national champion is joining me. And for my own experience, I've played probably every TCG that is at most people's local game stores. I've played everything from White Schwartz, Vanguard, Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh. I've dabbled into everything, and I've played at the regional level or nationals or something similar for all the games. And almost always the best games are the ones with the limited. Flesh and Blood, not an exception. The limited format is great for this game too.
Absolutely.
You want to introduce the our podcast?
Okay, so since this is our first episode, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about On the Bauble. So, On the Bauble podcast, we're going to be focused primarily on Flesh and Blood Limited, and we really want to help our listeners develop strong fundamentals and help them become better drafters as well as sealed players. But our primary focus will be draft, since I think there's quite a bit of transfer over. Like if you understand a draft format, you tend to be able to play sealed well as well. We will cover format specific ideas too. Like we will in the future be talking about the different classes in Uprising, how we think you should draft them, top cards, and so on. So we will get into like some of the nitty gritty, but we're always going to be trying to kind of give you takeaways and highlight things that can help you improve as a player that you can then leverage in future formats.
For On the Bauble, every week we want to at least get some input from our viewers. And this time it's not our viewers yet because this is the first episode, but we have some followers on Yuki's Twitter that asked some good questions. So we're just gonna go straight into it and ask those questions. And AOE Sammy asked, "Do you think limited should be an RTN format, or should it be reserved for higher tier play at Nats due to the players not playing the mode properly and making RTNs haphazard?"
Before we dive into Sammy's question here, maybe we should also introduce Tyler Broughton's question, since I think it's closely related. So Tyler Broughton also asks, "How do I draft good when I'm drafting with players who don't know how to draft or read signals? FAP rewards great drafting, but you don't always have the luxury of drafting with great drafters." So, kind of the takeaway that I get on from both of these questions is sort of just asking around like, how do you navigate a table where not everybody necessarily is experienced in limited, and you might have players just sort of playing a hero because they like it, or it's the only one they know how to play, or because dragons are cool, and does that sort of take away from the tournament integrity? In my opinion, it doesn't. I think that limited is really important, both because it's accessible and because it's incredibly skill testing. I think that as a player, I'm always trying to get a read at what my table is doing and where people are at. And I think that, especially like if you're noticing that things are kind of getting a little bit wishy-washy, or the signals aren't too clear and it feels kind of muddy, I try and just commit earlier into those pods usually, and try to focus on like solidifying myself early in a hero, and just sort of saying, well, while people might be like sort of like kind of going all over the place and drafting whatever, I'm going to be focusing on like trying to get the best deck that I can get, and just really like solidifying myself there. What about you, Jay? Do you have any other suggestions for players who are drafting at a table where maybe people aren't as comfortable with draft?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing to think about would be to notice which cards you think are going to be valued highly by the less experienced players. We'll be going over, I think, in future podcasts about which cards these cards might be. Um, but definitely, there are types of cards that newer players tend to like, and noticing that those cards are missing in a pack can be an easy indicator of what heroes are open, and then you can aggressively draft those open heroes. Also, being able to sit down at a table and then have a general good idea of who the players that you think are going to be good at drafting and who the players who are a little bit more on the casual side is going to be important too. So when you look at the list of the names on the table for your draft, if you can, if you have a general idea of who's been grinding a lot, like if Yuki's on the table, makes a little bit of a difference than if I see a brand new player that I've never seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the point that you raised about not wanting to like wanting to focus on the cards that are maybe undervalued at the table, because sometimes like what I found, especially with newer players at a table, is sometimes you might be getting like you might suspect that the person passing to you might even be like the same hero. Like maybe I'm drafting Icelander and I feel like I'm being passed to by an Icelander, but I also feel like they're not taking some of the cards that are maybe really important to that archetype. Like they're not like they're passing me like chilling ether veins, which I think is like a really important card. And sometimes even if you're being passed to by somebody who's drafting the same class as you, if they're not valuing the powerful cards in that deck, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't be that hero either.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think in shorter, easier way of saying this, like as an RTN format, definitely 100% of the time we should have a limited format qualifying for a higher tier event. Like when I was playing Magic, basically the only events I've gone to were sealed events for PTQs, and then sometimes I had to play standard or modern. But my preferred format is limited by a lot. When you are getting past, even if you are getting so and so cut by these players that are undervaluing good cards, and you get train wrecked a little bit, that also just means that you're getting past premium cards for your hero. So your deck can't be that bad. So I think it's actually whenever you are in a pod with worse players than you, your win percentage is going to be generally higher than if you were playing in a pod filled with good players. In our draft pod, sometimes we have like 6 good players in our local meta, and those drafts are atrocious. When Yuki is sitting to my right, and then if when Eric is sitting to my right, who's another good friend of ours from our local meta, the my decks tend to become much, much, much worse. Do you agree with me, Yuki?
One of the things that I think Jay is talking about is like often, um, like if players like to stay open by drafting strong cards and they're passing to you, it can sometimes just be hard to get cards that are of good power level. Whereas sometimes at tables with weaker players, sometimes those cards are like more are flowing a little bit more. So I think that like almost it's sort of weird because like there's this like on one hand you need to cooperate with your neighbors more, I think, in a high level draft, and you're rewarded for doing so. But I also think that like the average power level of the decks is not quite as high because a lot of players are kind of like drafting the powerful cards, especially early on in the pack, and often those cards are just like really really contested. So yeah, I think that like ultimately it's up to you to try and adapt to that draft and what's going on at the table, and it's like it's a skill that takes time and experience, but I think that you'll find that even if you're getting train wrecked at the draft, like it's likely that other people's drafts are messy too. And your goal is not necessarily to have like the greatest draft deck ever. It's just to have a better deck than everyone else at the table. And I think that with practice and some patience and learning, you should be able to reliably do that most of the time.
Okay, then I think that's good enough for the questions. Let's get into our main topic. There's actually a lot we have to talk about today, just because I want to get over the general Uprising limited format for the people who haven't played limited yet before for this set, and obviously the more detailed things about sealed. So Scrimmage Season 5 is a mix of Blitz and Sealed, depending on your local store. I don't know exactly how much Sealed there's going to be, but at least in our local meta, we have at least one. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming most people would have at least one as well.
Yeah. And I believe there is a top eight draft as well at most of these events. However, we'll be focusing on Seal today since you still need to get through Swiss playing Seal.
Yeah. So I just want to talk about how the format's going to work real quickly. You get 6 packs of Uprising. You open all of it up. In Uprising, we have 3 heroes. We have Fi, Dromai, and Icelander. Fi and Dromai do share the Draconic trait, which is going to be important when we talk about Draconic cards in general. And there is 2 types of tokens in this format, which is very unique to this format, where most of the time you have to draft your equipment. In this format, we have a token called Helios Miter. This card is a token equipment, which means every single hero gets to start it in their pool. You have to expect, or every single player that's going to be playing in your sealed game will have a Helios Miter. There is no exception to this. You want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about Phoenix Flame?
Yeah, maybe we can just touch on Helios Miter really quickly because I think it actually informs a lot about the format.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about this format that's kind of unique is that most heroes don't have that much access to Arcane Barrier, but Helios Miter can be activated multiple times. The pay two to prevent a damage from a source of your choice. The equipment gets destroyed at the end of the turn, but you can activate it multiple times. So the most obvious use case of this is against Icelander. If Icelander is going first, you can pitch into Miter as well as your Arcane Barrier if you have it, and avoid just taking like tons of damage right away on turn 0. Are there other uses of Helios Miter that you've used at all, Jay?
The most common one would be Dromai. Dromai needs some ashes for her to operate. We'll talk about ashes a little bit later in the episode. But Helios Miter is an instant ability, which means you can activate at any point, even if they aren't doing damage to you. So if the opponent tries to pass, if I am playing Dromai, I like pitching 2 red cards into Helios Miter's ability. Lets me create 2 ashes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great use. You can even use it to filter your hand if you're going first and you don't want to attack your opponent. Although keep in mind they can do the same if you end up pitching most of your hand. And also keep in mind they still have their action points. So if you're against a 5, pitching into Helios Miter might be risky, but in general it's a nice tool to have at your disposal. Um,
Yep.
yeah, the other token is, of course, the Phoenix Flames. They are a 0 go again red that don't block. They're draconic, so only the draconic heroes can play them, and they get +1 if you control at least one additional draconic chain link in addition to the Phoenix Flame. So 2 or more draconic chain links.
Yeah. For the Phoenix Flames, you can have 3 copies, which is a little bit weird. Because it is written on the text, you are allowed to have 3 copies in limited as well. Even if the rule is 2, you can have 3 Phoenix Flames in your deck. If anyone was confused about that at all,
Mm-hmm.
you want to get into Phi? Do you want to start that off?
Yeah, so let's talk about Phi. Phi is a draconic ninja that cares about building chain links, and in particular tends to care about draconic chain links. We see this from his weapon Emberblade, which is a 2-cost three attack weapon that says that if it's your second Draconic Chain Link or higher, it has go again. He also, his Fi's innate hero ability says that he can pay three and return a Phoenix Flame from his graveyard to his hand, and that gets reduced by the number of draconic chain links that you control. And also, he starts the game with a Phoenix Flame in the graveyard. So Fi is really all about using these Phoenix Flames and his weapon. And these attacks with Go Again to build draconic chain links, and then get some payoffs in the form of like rupture cards, such as like Breaking Point, which has sort of like a command. It's like a 1 for 5 that blocks three at red, and it has a, if it's Rupture, so if it's Chain Link 4 or higher, it will have like a Command and Conquer effect where it destroys the arsenal if it hits.
Yeah, so Fi likes building chain links with cards with Go Again. Fi typically wants a starter effect, so a leg tap or a head jab ability. Head jab is typically a 0 cost attack that attacks for 3 at red, and leg tap is a 1 cost attack with Go Again that attacks for 4 at red. And they Fi typically wants something like that to start its chain and play multiple draconic cards to make Fi's ability cheaper and to do multiple attacks in one turn to be able to pressure both the hand and the life total of the opponent. So in general, Fi is the aggro deck of the format, and when you play it, you just want to attack and not block.
Yeah, and he tends to be like very very efficient. His So Icelander's weapon sort of like is very good, but requires her to play a card, and Dromai doesn't really have a weapon. But Fi's Ember Blade is just super super efficient, and I think generally like the zero. I tend to like the zero costs a lot. They sort of lets you do like a 0 cost attack for three into like pitch a blue for the weapon, and then you can activate Fi's ability to get a Phoenix Flame, and that's like 7 damage off of 2 cards, which is really efficient, and it's really easy to add onto that if you have a, I don't know, if you have another head jab, you can add that in there. If you have like another leg tap, you can add that in there, and it will reduce his hero ability. So he's very in addition to being like very efficient, he's like very modular. He can use like big hands and small hands very well.
Yeah, and a lot of Fi's cards are very similar. Almost, I think every common card in Fi does essentially the same thing, where they're either a 0 cost 3 go again or a 1 cost 4 go again. Some of them would require a little bit more setup, like Lava Vein Loyalty, which requires you to have a Draconic card first, or Cinderkin Devotion as well, with the same ability. But all its other attacks are essentially the same card with an additional ability, or the same card without the ability.
Yeah, and generally those abilities are fairly marginal. Like Brand with Cinderclaw makes the next attack draconic, and in limited, like most of these abilities end up not mattering too much. Like it really is primarily the stat line, um, and this kind of makes sort of like moving into our next topic, which is building a sealed deck with Fi. I think that this makes Fi sort of the easiest to come together, meaning that like you are the most likely to have a good Fi sealed pool compared to the other classes. Just because he has so many cards that are redundant and do the same thing, you tend to just like have that critical mass of good Fi cards. Like none of the Fi cards are really bad. They're pretty much all attacks with Go Again, and so long as you have a bunch of Fi cards, you probably have a decent Fi deck. Um, but that being said, what kind of stuff, like let's say you're opening up your Fi sealed pool at a sealed event, Jay, what kind of cards are you looking for right away to evaluate like if that sealed pool is strong or not?
I think for Fi, I'm really just counting up how many red go again cards I have. So Dust Runner Outlaw, the the Ronin Renegade, and basically all of its counterparts. And I'm looking for red versions of that, not the blues or the yellow typically, but you're looking for a good density of red high attack power go again attacks. I think that is the first thing I would look at. The second thing I would definitely look at would be the generic draconic cards if you want to get into that. The draconic cards are typically cards that you want to play at the very end of the chain, and having a couple of those would be very strong, such as Rise Up would be one of the key cards I'll be looking out for in sealed for Fi. So does Blaze Headlong and Breaking Point and Flame Call Awakening would be very key cards I think
Mhm.
for Fi.
Yeah. Lava Burst as well is like a premium rupture card. In
Oh yes,
general, I
yes.
think
Almost
the
forgot about
yeah
Lava Burst.
yeah. In general, I think the rupture cards are sort of at their best in Fi. Like Dromai can play the draconic rupture cards, but they're not particularly. It's a lot harder for her to reliably get to Chainlink 4, whereas Fi can do it pretty much every turn. Um, but as Jay said, I think I tend to agree that those starters are super important, and a lot of these draconic finishers are like, and as far as I see it, are largely interchangeable. Like whether it's Breaking Point or Lava Burst or um, Stoke the Flames, those are all kind of roughly interchangeable. They perform a similar role and they have similar stat lines, although Lava Burst is probably the most efficient since it's a zero cost.
Yeah, and I think the last point I just want to say about Fi, before we move on to Dromai, would be about Emberblade. Because Fi is the only hero with a weapon that attacks, Fi turns all its yellows and blues very efficiently into damage, where all the other heroes cannot. And that's typically why Fi comes together a little bit more often than the other two. Is you playing some yellows in your deck doesn't really hurt the deck because it always turns into an Emberblade attack. Um, we'll talk about a little bit more about Dromai and Icelander later, but those two don't have a weapon that can turn these extra resources or non-red cards into essentially more powerful turns. Even if you draw two blues with five, you have a way to use those resources and turning it into damage.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So when I'm building my Fi deck, like I want a decent number of blues. It probably depends on like what your go against starters look like. Like the more expensive starters you have, the more blues you're gonna want. If you have like a lot more of the head jab and leg tap variants where you probably only need like one blue per turn though, I might look to like have like, I don't know, 8 to 9 reds, like maybe 10 if I have a particularly expensive deck. But I think that's like sort of the range of blues I'm looking for. And then pretty much as many go again attacks as I can, and like a few chain enders, like maybe like four. I find like having not too many chain enders helps the deck be consistent. What do you think, Jay, is like a rough outline for like what people should be looking for their Fi deck?
Yeah, in sealed, you really don't have a choice on how many like enders you get essentially. I
Mhm.
think you only get one draconic card per pack if I'm not mistaken, and obviously the foil and the rare slot doesn't count, but for the commons ones at least, we only get one draconic card per pack. And that typically ends up being once there's a couple of unplayable draconic cards like Flameborn Retribution, things like the premium ones like Breaking Point and Blaze Headlong, you're only going to be able to actually get two or three. I think you'll be okay playing almost all of them.
Mhm. Okay, ready to move into Dromai?
Oh, let's talk about before we move on. Let's talk about how many Phoenix Flames would you play in Fi sealed?
Oh, yeah. Super important question. I think that it really depends on your pool. So if I have enough cards that I'm happy to play in my deck, like good go again attacks, or even just like efficient reds, like critical strike, like as a generic is fine. Or like if you have like a red brother in arms as like a popper and a 6 attack, those are totally fine. I would play pretty much like all of those like solid cards over a Phoenix Flame. The main time I'm going above the one Phoenix Flame that starts in your graveyard is particularly if I have Flame Call Awakening that can search one up from my deck and put it into my hand, that's like a great reason to run an extra Phoenix Flame. But also cards that bring it back from the graveyard, like Rise from the Ashes comes to mind as like a fairly solid card, but you kind of want you really want to have like an extra Phoenix Flame to leverage that card. Otherwise, you kind of miss out on the Phi activation, and the rate on that card is not nearly as good. So typically for me, if I have like maybe 2 to 3, maybe around like 3 of those like those cards that care about Phoenix Flames that I want to have enabled, I'd probably look at like adding a second Phoenix Flame. And if I get up to like the 5-ish mark, I'd probably start running the third Phoenix Flame. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, I tend to treat Phoenix Flame like a cracked bauble. It's pretty bad unless you have like Flame Call Awakening is probably the main card I want to have a Phoenix Flame in my deck. Uh, because if Phoenix Flame never blocks and only attacks for 1 at most, and I've seen too many people attack me with Phoenix Flame from hand for 0, and whenever that happens, I feel like I'm gonna win the game. Like they attack me for 0 with a Phoenix Flame, and I'm like, oh, I get to keep my hand, and now they have 3 cards left. And typically, when they attack with Phoenix Flame, they're just trying to get an Ember Blade to get go again, or something like that. So it's typically been a good time whenever they top deck a Phoenix Flame. So I tend to try and not draw them, and the best way to not draw them is to not play them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like these are not cards that you typically want in your deck because they are below rate. But if you do have the supporting cast, they become a lot more serviceable. And yeah, in particular, I think Flame Call Awakening is like the really big one because it like if you just have the ones that come back from graveyard, you still have to draw that Phoenix Flame and kind of take the turn off. But if you have Flame Call, like whenever you actually get to search for a Phoenix Flame with Flame Call, it does feel kind of like you're getting away with something. Like that card is really, really good when you get to do that. So that's like maybe the biggest card.
Yeah, sorry. There's one more point I forgot to add. Um, Phoenix Flame, you can pitch them. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you have 3 Flame Call Awakenings in your deck, once you play your first Flame Call Awakening, the Phoenix Flame you add to your hand, if you pitch it back into your deck, it goes to the bottom of the deck. You won't draw it, and you can search it again with Flame Call Awakening. So if there for whatever reason, you only play one copy of Flame Call, that you play multiple copies of Flame Call Awakening and only 2 Phoenix Flames, you can continually search the same Phoenix Flame back up, whenever you need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one like kind of like final thing about Flame Call Awakening that I think makes it such a good card is that the shuffle effect is actually quite good. Especially if you have multiples of these, when you shuffle your deck, you're typically going to be shuffling back your resource cards, so your blues that you've pitched. And I've found that decks that have like if you're lucky enough to have like two copies of Flame Call Awakening, it's almost like you have an extra blue in your deck because you end up shuffling some blues back in. So it sort of helps like smooth out your resource curve without actually running like extra blues in the deck.
Yeah, I think that's all good points. Okay, let's move on to Dromai. Okay, so I'm just gonna read out what Dromai does. So Dromai is quite a bit of a complicated hero. I think it does have, I think, one of the most like weirdest rules text. So Dromai's first ability is whenever you pitch a red card, create an Ash token. And then its second ability is if you played a red card this turn, dragons you control have go again while attacking. So to get into Dromai, we actually have to explain a lot of things. So first, an Ash. What is an Ash? Ashes are a Draconic Illusionist token, which has the subtype Material, or maybe it's not a subtype.
I believe it is. I think it's a
It's
subtype.
a subtype
I think so.
Material. Okay. Ashes. Ash just has the text of while Ash is under an object, that object has Phantasm. And talking about Ash, we have to talk about dragons. The On backsides of all the Ash tokens is a card called Aether Ashwings. They are a Draconic Illusionist token, Dragon Ally. So they are an ally. They have 1 power and 1 health, and they have Arcane Barrier 1. This makes it Dromai the only hero to be able to gain more than 1 Arcane Barrier on the board, which is only important against Icelander. But Aether Ashwings are created with effects, not Dromai specifically, but all of her cards, or most of her cards, deal with either Ash tokens or making Ashwings, or turning ashes into Ashwings. So, very important about Aether Ashwings, this card does not have attack on it. So you cannot declare an attack with any dragons that does not have the keyword attack on it, unless you control Dromai's uh, weapon, Stormus Sandakai, where gives all dragon allies you control have once per turn 0 attack. Okay, go ahead, Yuki.
Right. So Dromai's other sort of major mechanics, the first one is also related to Ash, and this is the dragon invocations. All of the dragon invocations are red block 3 non-attack actions that require you to target an Ash and turn that Ash into whatever dragon is on the backside of the card. So the dragon invocations are all rare or higher. You typically don't get that many of them, and they're sort of like they're all they're similar to Aether Ashwings in that they are allies with life and attack, but they typically tend to be a little bit stronger in their effect. So to give you all an example, there is Invoke Miragai, and Miragai is a 2-power Draconic Illusionist ally that has 4 life, and Miragai says that your first dragon that attacks each turn loses and can't gain Phantasm. So yeah, Miragai protects your dragons from being popped by 6-power attacks, which naturally all your dragons and all your Aether Ashwings can be, because they have the Ash token underneath them that gives them Phantasm. So Dromai has that same vulnerability that Prism has, where the 6-power attacks can be used to pop her allies and neutralize her threats. I guess the other mechanic that she has is Phantasm, which is also like we've seen this in Monarch from Prism, and it works exactly the same. But she has a few attacks with Phantasm, like Ember Maw Senpai, which is just a 8-power 2-cost attack at red that blocks for 3, and if it gets destroyed, it will create an Ash, and it has Phantasm as well. So yeah, sort of a key drawback to keep in mind as Dromai is that you do have to deal with your opponent having poppers sometimes, and that can be like a really big tempo swing, since they're often trading not just for the card that you played with, but also any of the resources you use to play that card, whether that's literal resources you pitched for, or Ash which you had to generate, and that Ash is very much a resource that you have to manage.
Yes. For sealed, Dromai is, I think, a little bit on the weaker side because it requires so many things to come together. Uh, as we talked about, to generate Ash, the easiest way is to pitch reds. So Dromai really wants a density of reds, but some of her attacks are quite expensive or does cost resources, so you also want blues. And you also need reds to play to give all of your dragons go again. So you need a. It's probably the most. It's the deck that requires the most deck building from you. So it struggles a lot in draft of needing very specific cards for the deck to work. And in sealed, that problem is almost amplified to the point where it's very, very difficult to build a good Dromai deck in sealed.
Yeah, I know at like the Vegas pre-release and some of the events that I've seen online, that Dromai is definitely the hero that tends to do really well in sealed the least often. And I don't think it's because she's necessarily bad, but because she needs so many specific cards and like the right mix of cards to really work. And it's hard to get that to come together, um, especially in sealed when you don't have any like agency over which cards are in your pool. So you really need a pool that like supports Dromai. Um, so, Jay, do you want to kind of walk us through what some of those key cards for Dromai in Sealed are? I actually haven't had the chance to play Dromai in Sealed. My pools, I've only played a couple sealed events so far, and the events I've had, I actually haven't been able to build Dromai. I was just completely short. I didn't even have enough playables to play Dromai. So what kind of draws you into that deck when you're looking at a sealed pool?
Yeah. So going back to the Vegas premiere that we went to, uh, I went 5-1 with my Dromai deck there in the seal pool. My deck, I just had probably the perfect ratio of a lot of the cards. But the most key card I think that you need to have to even think about playing Dromai is Silken Form. This is the Draconic Illusionist equipment on the arm slot with the ability Instant, destroy Silken Form, and transform target Ash you control into an Aether Ashwing. And also has Quell. Oh, I guess we haven't talked about Quell yet. Quell is a very simple mechanic. It's a replacement ability that says if your hero would be dealt damage, you may pay one resource to prevent one of that damage. And if you do, destroy Silken Form at the beginning of the end phase. So Silken Form is a card that turns your extra ash at any point into an Aether Ashwing, and it's it's the equipment that turns like a spare, like if you have go again already that you don't have any cards to play, you can just turn one of your ashes into an Aether Wig and get in for one extra damage. And out of all of the equipment, I think Silken Form is the most powerful equipment in the set. It's just a little bit unfortunate that Dromai is just a very difficult deck to put together. But I think Silken Form is the most powerful common equipment in the game. Sorry, I wasn't considering legendaries, but
Yeah.
definitely in the commons, Silken Form is top notch.
Yeah, that one Aether Ashwing really does so much because not only is it the one extra damage on that turn, it's also a threat that they need to then answer and at least devote one damage to. Otherwise, it will keep accruing one damage again and again and again, and that value really adds up quick. So between stopping a damage through Quell and attacking for one and then eating a damage from them killing it, it's almost like a 3 point swing from Silken Form sometimes, which is a lot.
Yes. And so for which card main boardable cards are we looking for? It's going to be red Rake the Embers, red Billowing Mirage, and red Skittering Sands. I believe all three of those are commons, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. Uh, the, the all the other colors do not matter. It does have to be red Rake, red Billowing, and red Skittering Sands, as well as the dragons, the rare dragons, which is hard to get them, but you do definitely need either the one cost or the zero cost dragons. It being mana efficient is or resource efficient is very important because you are looking to play a density of reds, and often you're gonna have the 3 red, 1 yellow hands, and you do need to be able to play all of your attacks to keep up with both Icelander and Fi. And lastly, the most important, not the most important, but definitely powerful cards are the Senpais or Senepais. The red ones in particular, they attack for a lot of damage. The Ember Maw Senpai, the red 2 cost, attacking for 8, which has probably the highest damage in this set, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
it does. Yeah, it's like a whole it's like a whole 2 points better than like Brother in Arms if you compare it to Brother in Arms, and it blocks for an extra as well. So I have like two more attack and it blocks for one more compared to Brother in Arms. So the rate on it is just incredible.
Yeah. So you're really looking for those red cards, and if you probably need about five, preferably six of those cards in red for you to be able to even consider playing
Yeah,
Dromai.
and maybe one thing for maybe some of our viewers who haven't played with Illusionist as much is keep in mind that Phantasm does specify that it has to be a non-illusionist 6 power or higher. So even though Ember Moss Senpai does have 6 or more power, it is not actually what we call like a popper that would break a dragon or break a Phantasm. So just keep that in mind when you're playing. I know the first time I played Monarch, that was a little bit confusing for me.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the mythic dragons. Typically, newer players or people who haven't played with these mythic dragons, when they open the mythic dragons, they're gonna be like, "Oh, I want to play Dromai and I want to play these mythic dragons."
Yeah.
In short, I just want to say, do not do it. It's not worth it. It's a trap.
Yeah, I think like some of these cards might be kind of playable. Like I might end up with them in my deck, but they're not really they're not really a huge incentive to be in Dromai. Like kind of breaking them down, like Dracana Optimi, the 6 cost is just too expensive. 6 cost is really, really hard to play. If you do resolve it, like it has a nice on attack trigger. It is 6 toughness. It's probably good against Icelander, but it's just so tough to cast. Tomeltai melting equipment is like really more of a CC thing. The draft equipment's not so great. I actually do think Dominia is pretty good. The 4 cost is the most playable, and like the 4/4 stat line and being able to just like rip a card from their hand if you reveal a red off the top is really, really powerful. But I would so if you come from like Magic or some other limited games, like sometimes you see that like that bomb card that's gonna win you the game by itself. These dragons are not them, I think, is like basically what we're trying to say. Like they're serviceable at best, but they're not these like game winning bombs. Although Dominia is pretty solid.
Yes. Yes, Dominios is pretty solid, but the other two, I would try and stay away from. There are some decks you can build to play them, but I do not know if that would necessarily win you the game. Speaking of bad dragons, I'll talk about one good dragons, which is Invoke Kyloria, which is the backside of it is a 4 power 2 health dragon. This is whenever Kyloria hits a hero, gain control of an item they control. And if you don't gain control of an item, is there items in this
There's
set?
no items in this set.
Okay, so when it hits, it says draw a card. So you actually just get to draw a card. And typically, when you play Kyloria, you've played a red card. So this card has go again. And when this hits, you get to draw a card and immediately play that card. This card is the best dragon by far.
Yeah, and I know that sometimes people get a little bit shy about it because, like, especially against Icelander, where like an Ice Bolt or an Aether Hail. We'll talk about Icelander soon, but where she can potentially kill it as it's attacking. Um, Even though that is a thing that can happen, I think that any of the times where she doesn't have that 2 or more damage blue in arsenal like just ready to go, and there's no way for her to know like when she needs it, the tempo of like demanding a 2 card block or getting the card draw is just so big that like even though yeah they can kill it, it's worth the risk, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
I guess one dragon we didn't mention was uh, of the expensive dragons. I think my favorite is Necria. I think it having 7 toughness and attacking for 4 is really, really good. If it does get popped though, it's a bit of a blowout, and that's like one of the rough things about the expensive dragons is like if you pitched a blue and played Necria and it gets popped, that's a bit of a feels bad. But just Nekria's ability to like generate ash usually demand multiple cards from your opponent and like present 4 damage every turn, so it can't really be ignored. I've found Nekria to be pretty impressive.
Talking about Necria, I think we can clarify a little bit on her rules text too. Necria says whenever Necria deals or is dealt damage, put a -1 counter on her and create an Ash token. Uh, if your opponent blocks out Necria, she doesn't get a counter, does he?
No, she does not.
Yeah. So if it is coming down to the later portions of the game when they basically have to block out Nekria's attack, she will not lose health. And if they have to attack into Nekria to try and kill it, you're going to win the game.
Yeah, usually it will require kind of like two attacks from most heroes. Like, but keep in mind that she does lose the health every time she gets hit. So, for example, if you hit it for 3, she'll get a -1 counter, so she'll have 6 life and 3 damage on her. Then, if you hit her for 2, she'll get another -1 counter, so her life total will go down to 5, and that will be enough to kill her. So she can be dealt with, but the problem is that whenever she's getting those minus counters, that's like a whole card or a whole attack, like a whole card's worth of damage, like a four power attack that got through. So the card advantage on Necria, if she sticks around, is really impressive.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the last thing to talk about Dromai, if you are going to build her in sealed, please be careful about playing a card called Sand Cover. Sand Cover, at least the red one, says target ash you control gains ward 4 until end of turn. And this card does not have a block value, and it is a Draconic Illusionist instant. The Sand Cover is the red Sand Cover in particular is good against Icelander, but it is not that good against Fi or the Dromai Mirror. The red one in particular is the most playable of the three, but you should be looking at playing almost all of the other generics over hand cover most of the time. Except for against Icelander. This should be more of a sideboard card against Icelander. And I've seen multiple people play sand cover in their main board against Fire or the Dromai Mirror, and it can cause you more troubles than the benefits that it's presenting you.
Yeah, I think the cost, the takeaway here is the cost of requiring an ash is really really big, because Dromai pretty much always wants to have one ash left over, because all of your invocations actually require an ash already in play to target. So you cannot just like pit, like, even though if you pitch your red to play the invocation, you get an ash, that you won't have a target until like when you're announcing the spell being cast, and you're always wanting to have that one ash kind of left floating at the end of your turn, so that if you do draw into like an invocation, you can actually play it. And sand cover just, like, yeah, the four block is okay, but the fact that you have to have an ash for it is just such a huge cost.
Yes. The other thing about sand cover is the best card, one of the best commons in Dromai is Rake the Embers, and if you ever use one of your Ash to block 4 damage, when your red Rake the Ember isn't making 3 Ash Wings, it can be a disaster, or making your cards worse than it already is. It's gonna make it hard for Dromai to win, mostly in sealed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so your sealed Dromai deck like very well might contain some yellows and some blues of some of those cards, but like Jay said, like, you really kind of want a critical mass of those red go agains, so that you're able to turn on the go again for all of your dragons. So yeah, the yellows are somewhat playable, but the reds are really key, since they turn on so many of Dromai's mechanics.
Okay, and I think before we move on, the last question I think a lot of people will be asking is it okay to play Phoenix Flame Dromai decks?
In general, I would say you need a really good reason to play Phoenix Flames in Dromai. They tend to synergize more with Fi. He has more cards that care about them. And we kind of already mentioned like how Phoenix Flame is almost like a bauble, sort of the same thing for Dromai. It is worth noting that it is a red go again that does turn on your dragons. So like you can pitch it to make ash, you can give your dragons go again for 0 cost. So it's not completely dead, but I think that it not blocking and not really doing much does make it quite a liability. And I would want to look for a reason to be playing it. I think the big one again would be like Flame Call Awakening, possibly Transmogrify. Although I find the Transmogrify Phoenix Flame, it's a little bit, it's okay, and if you're getting that Phoenix Flame off of like a Flame Call Awakening or like a Flameborn Retribution, it's okay. But if you're spending like a Phoenix Flame in hand and a Transmogrify and a card to pitch, that's 3 cards for like an 8 power attack if it's the red one, and that's not, it's okay, but it's not fantastic. It's not really where you want to be.
Yeah, it's more of a, oh, I've done this cool thing and this 3 card combo. But then in reality, you spent 3 cards for 8 points of damage, which is at best
Yeah, and then when
on
you
par
don't
with all the
draw
other
with the
cards.
Transmogrify, it's like a little bit of a disaster. So yeah, I think you want to actively have reasons to include Phoenix Flames and Dromai, rather than just including them just because.
Yep. I think the last point I just want to make right before we move on, I forgot. I almost forgot about it. To trigger Rupture in Dromai, the easiest way is to start with a red card, or any red strip, and then if you have multiple Aether Ashwings, you can attack 1 1 1 1 1 1, and because they're all Draconic cards, and you don't have to break the chain and attack you with each of the Ashwings, you can make a very long string of chain link, just using the Ashwings. And the one card that comes into mind when talking about really long chain links is Red Hot. I think Red Hot is more of a Dromai card than a Fi card because you can get up to like 6 or 7 chain links if you chain enough Rake the Embers together. This might not be for sealed and more for like a Dromai draft deck where you can end up with like 4 Rake the Embers. But when you do get up to the critical mass of Aether Ashwings, and if they can all attack, finish with a Red Hot, that is a very good way to deal
Yeah,
some
but
unblockable
I
damage
think
to your
importantly, like
opponent.
Red Hot is more of like a payoff for having a good Dromai deck than it is a reason to be Dromai, at least in my eyes, because you need to be able to like get all those Ashwings first for that card to really be live. So it's like a nice like icing on the cake, but it's not like a reason to be in Dromai.
Yeah, it's more of a win more card, but it does it does prevent you from Fi just playing 4 or 5 attacks and killing you on a swing back turn, even if you had eight Ashwings on the board, which sometimes can be a problem where they can just ignore your Ashwings and hit you instead as Dromai. So you do need a way to finish the game somehow. Okay, let's talk about Icelander. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so Icelander is probably my personal favorite hero in Uprising. I find the games with her are very intricate. There's a lot of decision points, and there's just like a lot of play to them. Icelander is an elemental wizard, and she has the essence of ice, which means that you can include ice cards in her deck in addition to the wizard and elemental cards. She starts at 18 life, which is notable. She has a little bit lower life total than the other heroes. This also does mean that things like Scar for a Scar will be turned on right away, so it's not always strictly a disadvantage, but she is a little bit fragile. And her hero text says that she can play blues from her arsenal, as if they were instants, so long as it's on your opponent's turn. And whenever you play an ice card during your opponent's turn, you create a frostbite under their control. So that's Icelander's ability, and then her weapon, Waning Moon, is a 2 cost activate once per turn instant, and it says that it deals 2 damage to an opponent if it's your turn, or 3 damage to sorry, this is all arcane damage, 2 arcane damage to an opponent on your turn, or 3 damage to an opponent if it is their turn. And you can only activate Waning Moon if you've played a non-attack action that turn. So kind of like very broadly speaking, Icelander is trying to play a non-attack, follow up with the Waning Moon for the 2 damage on her turn, or especially 3 damage on her opponent's turn, and sort of play this like chip damage game where she can keep presenting this arcane damage that is hard to block, since it requires the opponent to have Arcane Barrier. And typically, most classes only have access to Arcane Barrier 1, except for Dromai, who has
Ashwings.
the Aether Ash Rings. Yeah. Some of Icelander's core mechanics is one of them is Fuse. So we've seen this in Tales of Aria. When you play that card, you can pay an additional cost of revealing an ice card to get an additional effect. So in the case of Aether Ice Vein, this is the red one is a 3 cost 5 arcane damage spell that can target a hero or an ally. And it says that if it's fused with an ice card, and it deals damage to a hero, that hero has to discard or pay 2 resources. So Fuse is sort of like a key mechanic for Icelander that does give her just like a little bit more of a punch in some of her spells. Notably, you do have to pay. You have to pitch for the spell before you fuse. So you cannot pitch and fuse with the same card. You have to pitch as well as fuse on top of it. So something to keep in mind with your sequencing.
I think a key point with Fuse, with Icelander in particular, is the blue cards that require the Fuse does make it easier for Icelander to fuse, as the blue card is going to come from the arsenal. That means you have a full hand from drawing up from the end of your turn. So even after paying the cost, it's very easy to keep an ice card in your hand to just show your opponent for the Fuse.
Yeah, and typically, if you're fusing something like a red on your turn, usually you really want that to be a blue, because that allows you to then arsenal that card, and play it on your opponent's turn. Although you could also pitch it to Waning Moon if you have to.
Mhm. And I think the last keyword will be afflictions. This is, I think, only on mythic rares, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, this is primarily like Frost Hex and Hypothermia.
Yeah. So afflictions are auras. They go onto your opponent's board, and they give the controller of the affliction aura an ability. So, for example, Frost Hex, Frost Bites you control have at the beginning of your end phase. This deals 1 arcane damage to you.
So let's talk about Icelander's equipment here. She has a few different pieces of equipment. I think the most important one is the Spellfire Cloak. This is a wizard chest equipment with Arcane Barrier 1. And it says that if it is your opponent's turn, you can destroy it and gain a resource. I think that this card is really essential to Icelander, both because having Arcane Barrier in the mirror is really crucial. Like if you've ever played an Icelander mirror and you have Arcane Barrier and your opponent doesn't, you're at such a huge advantage. It feels almost hard to lose at times if you have Arcane Barrier and your opponent doesn't. But also, that one resource can be really clutch, because at worst, that one resource is going to be like 1 health off of a quell if you have like a quelling slippers or something lying around. And at best, it can be a whole extra Waning Moon activation on your opponent's turn. Like maybe you have a yellow in hand and you have a 1 cost in your arsenal, and there's just like no other way for you to do it. But getting that extra Waning Moon activation is a whole extra 3 damage. It can also let you play cards like Ice Bolt that cost 2 from your arsenal. So you could have a blue Ice Bolt in your arsenal, come in for 3 damage, give them a frostbite, and then pop the cloak to get a Waning Moon activation off with only like a single blue card pitched. So just its ability to be like worth 3 whole points of damage is pretty impressive.
I think my favorite card to play off of that one extra resource would be Oasis. Oh, sorry. The card of the name is Oasis Respite. It's the prevent
Mhm.
the next 4 damage. It'll be dealt to target hero this turn by a source of your choice, and if you have less life than each other hero, you may gain 1 life. It's a generic instant that anyone can play, but with the cloak, you can just pay the 1 and block 4 damage, gain a life. So essentially, if you just break the cloak, it'll stop 5 damage, and you don't have to pitch anything for it.
Hmm. And then Icelander's other equipment is there's the glacial horns, which it's an action. You can break the glacial horns to freeze their arsenal and up to one ally that they control. And this is really good for sometimes just like producing pivot turns out of nowhere. If Dromai has a dragon you can't deal with, you can freeze it and kind of deal with it next turn. You can also potentially freeze their arsenal if there's a turn where you say, I really need to be able to just hold on to my hand next turn so that I can do something on my turn and then kind of take over the game. Glacial Horns is really good for that. It also combos with the Conduit of Frostburns, which is a wizard gloves. These gloves have Quell 1, and they also have an activated ability where you can destroy them. And the next spell that you have that deals arcane damage gains, if it deals arcane damage and hits a hero, destroy any frozen cards that they have in Arsenal. So you have like a little bit of a mini combo here where you can Glacial Horns their arsenal and then Conduit of Frostburn to blow up that arsenal. I think that you need to be selective about when you do this. Giving up 2 pieces of equipment is a lot, but sometimes popping this off and taking their arsenal is pretty powerful and something to keep in mind that you can do.
Just on a side note, do not forget that Glacial Horns is 1 card in their arsenal and 1 ally. So if you are playing as Dromai, you get to freeze both.
Mhm.
And the most important thing about Glacial Horns is that remember you have Helios Miter. Uh, in the mirror, Glacial Horns does absolutely nothing. Because it is an action, Icelander does get to respond to it before the card gets frozen. So they can, if it's a blue card, they get to play it still.
Yeah, yeah. You should definitely be playing the Miter over the Glacial Horns every time in the mirror.
Okay, then so what are we looking for when we open up a pool and it's looking like an Icelander pool? Like what makes you go into Icelander?
The biggest thing is that you need to have a critical mass of blues just to like you want to be activating that waning moon, which costs 2, and you also need the blue non-attack action so that you can play spells on their turn, which is when your waning moon is the most efficient. Typically, an average turn for Icelander might look like pitch a blue on your turn, play a 1 or a 0 cost from my arsenal and activate waning moon, and then maybe on my turn I might want to play like a 1 or 0 cost and activate Waning Moon again. So that would be like 2 blues already, and then maybe like a third blue for Arsenal. So you can see how like hungry for blues Icelander is, and I think that how good your Icelander deck is largely predicated off those blues. You want them to be primarily non-attack actions because those are the ones that she can play at instant speed. But that being said, I think having a few attacks is okay. In particular, critical strike, which blocks their 3, is like pretty serviceable if you have a couple of them. And blue brother in arms has been pretty impressive for me. Icelander just sometimes has like an extra resource, either from her Spellfire Cloak, or maybe you like play a 0 cost and activate the Waning Moon, and you have 1 resource left over. And just getting a 4 block out of Brother in Arms always feels really good. It can also just answer a dragon, like it answers like Thamai or Miragai or something, and it's a blue card, and sometimes those are hard for Icelander to answer. So I think that Blue Brother in Arms overperforms. Other than that, I would stay away from pretty much all the blue attacks. Like I really don't want like a blue flex in my deck, for example.
Fair enough. So about how many blues am I looking for?
Yeah, I would say that ideally I want like 15. I'd say sort of like 15 minimum. Like maybe I played an Icelander deck in Vegas that had 14. It was okay. I wouldn't go too much lower than that though. And I think ideally you want more in like the 18 to 20 range, but you're not always going to be able to get that. A 15 blue Icelander deck is quite serviceable though. And if they're, especially if they're good blues and you have other good supporting cards, it can be quite good. And of those blues, I'd say you maybe want like two or three of them to be attacks at most. One thing worth noting, though, is because the blues do turn on your waning moon, most of them are pretty good. Like a lot of cards that you might not think are good enough, I think are more than good enough in Icelander. Like a blue sigil of protection is just a good card in Icelander. You can play it, stop 2 damage, activate the waning moon for 3 more damage. It's very efficient. Even like blue healing bomb is not exciting but serviceable. Maybe like the most begrudgingly playable card is like blue read the ripples. It only blocks 2, and you the opt one and draw a card at the end of your turn is a little bit haphazard. Like you don't get that much control over what you arsenal. So that's maybe like the worst non-attack blue. But in general, most of the non-attack blues are pretty playable, and I'd be okay with playing them in a sealed deck.
Okay. What are the best ones? I don't think we've gone over that yet.
Yeah, so I think the best ones by far are like Aether Hail is really important. It's a 1 cost that deals 2 at blue, and it's also an ice card, so you can fuse with it. And it gives them a frostbite if you play it on their turn. That one's just super efficient. Frosting is also good. The 1 cost 0 damage ice wizard spell.
1 damage.
I
Yeah,
think
0 cost 1 damage.
yeah, sorry, yeah, 0 cost 1 damage. Um, Aether Ice Vein is another key card. I think it's good in all the pitches. Blue is good because you can play it on their turn, 3 cost 3 damage with the discard effect. But the reds and yellows playing on your turn is also very good. This card is so strong because it lets you play. It lets you strip 2 resources or a card from their hand, and whether you do that on their turn and shut down their current turn, or you wait till your turn, play an Aether Ice Vein, rip a card from their hand, and then set up your arsenal ideally like with an ice card and give them a frostbite. You're really neutralizing how much damage they can do, and it feels like that card more than any other one really sort of dictates the flow of the game. But in general, like any blue non-attack that does damage is pretty good. And I guess one blue that doesn't fit into this category that I think is still very good is blue strategic planning. Specifically against Fi, you can play this at instant speed to put a Phoenix Flame on the bottom of their deck. And notably, you can wait until they activate their Fi ability and then respond to it with your ability and bottom their Phoenix Flame. Especially if they only have one, you might just completely like make it so that they don't get to do that anymore, which is huge.
Yeah. Just a reminder for anyone who's not watching this on YouTube. Strategic planning is put an action card with cost 0 from a graveyard, so anyone's graveyard, on the bottom of its owner's deck, and then it has another ability as at the beginning of the end phase, draw a card. A lot of people forget this portion of the text and forget to draw the card, but if you do play it on your opponent's turn, you get to draw it at on their end step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I guess one other blue to mention is Ice Eternal. It's a XX costing cast spell that has 3 block, and it says that, and it only comes in blue pitch. It's an Icelander specialization, and it says that when you play it, it creates X frostbites under their opponent's control if it's fused, and it deals and it deals damage equal to the number of frostbites to that opponent. So what's really nice about Ice Eternal is that if your hand is set up well for it, like if you have, let's say you have like 3 blues and an ice card, that's 4 frostbites or 4 damage, and then you can probably get a waning moon on top of it for like 7 damage on their turn. It's just a lot of reach, and it can be like a very powerful way to close out a game. So another really good Icelander card.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about Icelander?
I think that's about it. I think that Icelander probably comes together less often than Phi, but more often than
Dromai?
than Dromai. The biggest thing you're looking for is the blue count. If you don't have the blue count, like I'd say at least like 14 is probably the minimum, 14, 15. I wouldn't even consider it. But if you do have the blue count, you would might be surprised if you have sort of like a mediocre five pool. You're not that excited about it, but you have quite a few blues. Then maybe you should give Icelander a shot. She can do a lot with cards that don't look very impressive. Waning Moon is a really powerful weapon, but you do have to work to enable it.
Yeah, that seems fair. Okay, so to wrap up the sealed format, we're gonna be talking about the generics and the draconic cards, and mainly the premium generic cards that we're gonna be looking for in every seal pool. These generic cards typically will go in every single deck. Obviously, some of the more defensive cards likes to be in more Dromai Icelander, and some of the more aggressive cards likes to be in Fi. But in general, these cards are in sealed premium cards. You just like are praying to open at common. The first card is the card I talked about when we talked about Icelander. It's Oasis Respite. Oasis Respite is a one cost instant, generic instant, prevents the next 4 damage that will be dealt, and if you have less life than your hero, gain 1 life. I think this is the first card that gives a 5 point damage swing as an instant, if I'm not mistaken, in the game. That's on defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really nice combined with the quell equipment. A common kind of play pattern is like if you pitch a blue and you quell play this stop 4 damage gain a life. That's like 2 cards that have blocked essentially like 7 damage and maybe in amounts that are hard to block. And it's really like it's very powerful defensively.
Yep. This card is very strong against Icelander. So when you are playing against Icelander, you want every copy of this you can get, and all 3 colors. Do you agree with me in there?
Generally, yeah. I think I would generally aim to play multiple copies of this. In the mirror, I would be careful about boarding in too many, but in general, like finding ways to stop arcane damage against Icelander is pretty premium.
Yeah. The next card is Scar for Scar. This is a reprint from WTR, and this is a 0 cost generic attack action. It says when you play Scar for Scar, if you have less life than your opposing hero, it gains go again. So the
Mhm.
time you've cast it is when it checks. So when you play it, you check your life totals. If you have less life, it gains go again.
Yeah, and it's 4 power at red, 2 block. What decks do you like Scar for Scar in?
Scar for Scar Red, I like it in Dromai a lot. It does help
Mhm.
with turning on your go against for your dragons. And the red one also in Fi, just because it's aggressive. I guess the red one's also good in Icelander because if you start the turn with Scar for Scar at the very beginning of the game, you just have less life already, so it always has go again.
Yeah, I had this happen to me in Vegas. I played against an Icelander who went second, and yeah, they started with red scar for a scar into I think like a ice bolt for 5, and it was just some like that's presenting 9 damage. Most of it I can't block. Then they get to arsenal their blue or whatever. Like it was really a lot to compete with.
Yeah, do you like the yellow or the blue Scar for Scar?
I find them begrudgingly playable in Icelander, particularly the yellow. The blue's a little bit sad, but the yellow is decent. Mostly because those high toughness dragons are really hard to deal with, and like Uvia is a big problem. But if you have the yellow, you can do like a yellow scar into like a red frosting for 3 damage and clear an Uvia, which can be pretty clutch. So I'm okay with it as like sort of like a sideboard for Icelander versus Dromai, but in general, I don't really want to be putting yellow scars in my deck.
Okay. The third card I want to talk about is Fendel's Fighting Spirit. Fendel's Fighting Spirit is a rare. We haven't really talked about much of the higher rarity cards yet, but Fendel's Fighting Spirit is a rare generic action attack card. It costs 3, and it says when you attack or defend with Fendel's Fighting Spirit, if you have less life than an opposing hero, gain 1 life. Did I say this power? I don't think so. It's a 3 cost 7 power 2 block card.
Yeah. So the big thing here is that it's a popper, and I guess we haven't talked about it, but there's not that many 6 power attacks in the set, and Findle's Fighting Spirit is a 6 power attack at both red as well as yellow. And yeah, so being a popper against Dromai is premium, and also just being like a pretty efficient attack. I think if you're able to hold 2 cards and attack for 7 and gain a life, that's always a really big swing. And just in general, Findle's Fighting Spirit is just a very very good card, specifically in red and yellow. The blue is a little bit less
It's not good
exciting.
for Dromai, but Fendel's Fighting Spirit reads when you defend with Fendel's Fighting Spirit. So even if the card has Phantasm, you still gain the life if you have less life. Unfortunate for you Dromai players, this card is very, very, very good against you.
Yeah. So I guess in general, like as Dromai, you can expect to get popped like maybe once per game, once or twice per game. In sealed, the poppers are pretty sparse. There's just like red brother in arms at common, Findle's Fighting Spirit in red and yellow at rare. There's Flex at rare, but that does require like two resources to pump its attack to 6. So it's like a 2 card block to be a popper. And then there's Erase Face at Majestic, and I guess Thaw at Majestic as well.
Mhm.
But you don't see Majestics that often. So
Yep. The next
yeah,
card, as you mentioned, that I want to talk about with Brother in Arms. The red one is a 2 cost generic attack action that attacks for 6, blocks for 2, but it has the ability when you defend with Brother in Arms, you may pay a resource, and if you do, it gains 2 armor or 2 defense points. Not sure what people call it nowadays.
yeah. So primarily the red here is the one to look for, although the blue, as we talked about in Icelander, is pretty good. And look for spots where you can quell with it. If you can pitch a blue and go quell quell block for 4, it's pretty decent defense as well.
Yeah, it has a lot. I think the red and the blue one has a lot of applications. The yellow one is okay, but probably the worst of the 3 for sure.
Yeah, it's serviceable, but it's not. It's sort of like a 29th, 30th card where if you have to play it, you can, and it's not super embarrassing, but it's not great.
Yeah, I think agree with that. And the last card on my notes says Blue Strategic Planning. I think we already talked about it in Icelander, but what about for the other heroes? Would you play it?
I think in general, I would. Certainly in the Fi matchup, I would tend to play it. I think that the reds and yellows are a little bit of a trap just because sometimes putting the Phoenix Flame on the bottom of your opponent's deck just doesn't do anything if they've already drawn a second one. But in the blue pitch, just having a blue that can kind of hose fi, especially if it's early in the game, is just really, really powerful. So, like, if you ever open this in turn 0, you just get to bottom their Phoenix Flame or force them to start with a Phoenix Flame in their hand if they want to pitch for it. And that's just really, really strong. And then the rest of the times when it's not relevant, you can just pitch it for blue. So, I'm usually pretty happy playing this against Fi.
What about
Um,
against the other heroes like Icelander or Dromai?
it's okay. It does replace itself. I think as Icelander, it's pretty much always fine because it does have the draw card and it turns on your waning moon. But for Fi and Dromai, I might not want to play Blue Strategic Planning so much outside of the Fi matchup.
Okay, so it's mostly a hoser for Fi.
Yeah, mostly a hoser for Fi, and for Icelander, it's just an efficient card because it replaces itself.
Okay, and the last things I just want to talk about is legendary equipments. We really haven't touched most of the Majestics, but let's even skip all the Majestics and talk a little bit about the legendary cards. Are they like broken to all hell like they are in CC, or what do you think?
I think in general, like a good shortcut for the legendary equipments is if they block, they're probably good, primarily for their ability to block. I think most of the abilities aren't particularly relevant. Like, I don't know, maybe Flame Scale Furnace's activated ability to give you resources could be relevant if you're on Dromai, but in general, these are mostly cards that block. That being said, even like a block 2 with Blade Break or a block 2 with Temper is very, very strong. And starting with that extra like 2 to 3 life is a huge deal. And if you open a legendary equipment for one of the classes you play and it blocks, that is a very reasonable, like that's a pretty big nudge to want to be that class, because whenever you play that class, you're just starting with 2 to 3 extra life.
Mhm. Then what about cards like Ghostly Touch, where it doesn't block?
Ghostly Touch is pretty unplayable. I would, if I have literally no other equipment, I would play Ghostly Touch and expect it not to do very
Mhm.
much. But I would play like a quell equipment over Ghostly Touch.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I agree with that. Like all of the zero blocking legendary equipment, like all, how do I pronounce it? All Alvation Constellus? Alu
Alluvian Constellas.
Yes, okay. I butchered the name there. But yeah, like this card as well. It does have Arcane Barrier 1, so it's okay, but I'd rather have a Spellfire Cloak.
Yeah, notably, Alluvian is really good, specifically in the Icelander mirror. I actually did play against it once, and it is pretty broken, just because getting to get, like, every 2 turns where they stop arcane damage, they get a free waning moon activation, which is just crazy amounts of value, and is pretty overwhelmingly powerful. Like, I really felt outclassed by this when I played against it in the mirror in Vegas. But it's really only relevant in that matchup. Like, in all your other matchups, you're going to want
The Spellfire
Spellfire
Cloak.
Cloak.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like a small nudge to play Icelander, but because you don't know what you're going to be playing, and I think you're going to be playing more Fi than anything else, it's like not a huge reason to play Icelander in sealed.
Okay, I don't think we need to talk about legendaries that much more. You probably won't see it often. It's, I think, about one in every four drafts. You might see one player with one, and you might not even play against them, and they might not even have the deck to play it, so they might not even play it. So I think, as Yuki said earlier, if it blocks, play it. It's really good. If it doesn't, it's probably not that good, so you can probably skip on it. Let's talk about draconic cards. We talked about most of them, but I want to talk about the higher rarity cards in draconic that I see a lot of people try to play. Is the first card I want to talk about is Liquefy. How good is this card?
Liquefy is basically like a secret rupture card, because it requires chain links to be able to get rid of, to have an effect. And the effect that it has is just not very relevant in limited. So I think that Liquefy is like almost a blank card in limited, and I would play just about anything over Liquefy, to be honest. It's pretty close to unplayable. The payoff is just not worth, like, the card typically.
Next card is, oh, sorry, I almost forgot about the top card, Thaw. How good is Thaw? Is it playable? Would you play this, or would you skip on this as well?
I think Thaw is okay as a popper into Dromai, and honestly, probably I'd imagine it's serviceable into Icelander. You can, a 2 for 6 attack is sort of like a brother in arms, and then you can deal with a frostbite. Against Fi, I wouldn't be that excited to include Thaw in my deck though.
Mhm.
So it's okay, but it's not great.
Yeah. The I think one point about Thaw is this card's a little bit awkward in the sense that this card doesn't work against Icelander well. Because Thaw reads while Thaw is in your graveyard at the start of your turn, you may banish it and choose one. It either destroys a Frostbite, an Ice Affliction, or unfreeze a frozen card. Frostbites, Icelanders don't make Frostbites at the beginning or before the beginning of your turn. So you actually almost never get to pop a Frostbite with this card. Unfreeze target frozen card, Icelander typically can't has a very difficult time freezing your arsenal. So
Mhm.
your arsenal doesn't get frozen often. And destroy target ice affliction might be the most relevant of them, but uh that's a mythic. So playing a mythic against another person's
Yeah.
mythic seems a little bit unlikely to happen.
Yeah, I guess I should specify that, like, I think that Thaw is okay, but it's not some crazy card. It's mostly a brother in arms, like a red brother in arms,
Mhm.
and like maybe if they play an Arctic Incarceration, you get a Sniper Frostbite. But I agree, it's not an exciting card. I think it's mostly a 6 power attack for NT
If
Dromai.
you had the choice between Thaw and Rebellious Rush, which one would you play?
Definitely play Rebellious Rush. I just think having the go again built in and the Draconic Chain Link. Well, I guess Thaw is a Draconic, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I know what
the
you mean.
go again is too huge.
Fair enough. And the next card would be Uprising in Draconic.
Uprising, I think I see a lot of people get drawn into this card. It is a 3 block with natural go again, so I think it has some application in Dromai. Like if you have a bunch of Ashwings, you can play this and swing out with them, and you do get like essentially up to 4 power out of this. However, the scenarios where it matters are pretty narrow, and overall, like this is like a card that's like maybe you can put it in your in your Dromai deck if you have a lot of Ashwings, but it's not really. It's never a card that I'm like looking for, and it's definitely not a reason to play Draconic. It's just a card that is kind of okay in Dromai and
Yeah,
not really that good in Fi because it doesn't give a chain link.
yeah. I think at least for me, I look at Uprising like a slightly better Phoenix Flame. It's just a 0 starter that gives your next attack +1, and it's just so hard to attack with enough Draconic attack that this card does get that 4 points of power, and most of the time it will give 1, maybe 2, uh,
Hmm.
and then obviously it's a fine card when you play 4, but like Blaze Headlong does 4 damage without working for it, so I don't know. This card has some competing cards at common that probably do its job better.
Yeah, it's like filler. I think it's like filler and Dromai at best.
Yeah. If you're looking for that red density, it might be good.
Yeah, and it does block 3, so at least it has that going for it.
Yeah, you're right. And then the last Draconic Mythic is Tome of Firebrand. Is this playable?
I would caution you against putting this in your Dromai deck. I think that while you can sometimes get to Chainlink 4 in Dromai, it's not reliable, and sticking this, even if you arsenal this card, it might just get stuck there. In Fi, I think if you have a deck that is very good at going wide reliably, it can be a strong card. Although I might hesitate to play it, like I might not want to play it into Icelander. So I think it's like it reads very powerful. Drawing 2 cards is really good, and if you ever resolve it, it is a really good effect. But you really want to make sure that your deck is realistically going to be able to get there, and and yeah, maybe when you're being taxed by Icelanders like Discard and Frostbites, you might want to shy away from playing this card.
Fair enough. I think a key card to make sure you need to have when you if you want to include Tome of Firebrand in your deck is Flame Call Awakening and Inflame. Both I think both cards extend your Draconic Chain Links very easily, and
Mhm.
probably the only time you can really play Tome of Firebrand is if you have those cards.
Yeah, more or less agree.
Yeah, so those were all the Draconic cards. Did you want to talk about any other Majestics that you have in mind?
Yeah, there's a few. I think Erase Face gets mentioned for being a popper. I think the effect on it is just okay, but it is a 6 power attack that you can play. It's decent. Um, I also want to talk about Insidious Chill. I think Insidious Chill is maybe the closest thing to a bomb in this set. I think in general, this set's Majestics are not very bomby. Like they're not going to win the game on their own. But I do think that Insidious Chill is incredibly powerful. It's a blue 3 cost non attack, and it says you can play it out. It's an aura, and it's an ice card, and it says that whenever you fuse, you can remove a counter from it, and your opponent discards or pay 2 resources, and it starts with 3 counters on it. It is a little bit slow to get going. Like the 3 cost is a lot, and if it's late in the game, it's too much. But having the floor of being a blue and Icelander and an ice card is pretty good. And if you ever get to resolve this even somewhat early in the game, it just completely takes over the game. Discarding multiple cards from your opponent's hand is just a ton of tempo, and it's really hard to keep up with Insidious Chill. So that's a card that's really impressed me, and is a pretty strong reason to be Icelander if you have the blues and the fuse to support it. Notably, you do have to fuse. So if you're not able to fuse, you cannot play this card.
You know about how many fuse cards you're gonna be looking for when you play this Insidious Chill? Oh my god, I can't pronounce these cards.
I'd probably want at least like 5 to 6 fuse cards that I'm planning to play. They could be reds or blues. And I'd also want to make sure that I have a decent number of ice cards to fuse with. But I find that Icelander typically has quite a few ice cards almost without trying. So it's usually more like the good fusion spells that are the bottleneck more than anything. So this could be cards like Icebind, where if you fuse them, they don't do that much extra, or it could be like the premium fuse cards like Aether Ice Fiend. But yeah, usually around like 5 to 6.
Okay, that sounds. I think I agree with that too. Any of the other? Oh, I think there's one more mythic I want to talk about. It's that all you got. It's a mythic generic defense reaction. All the generics, this might be one of the most powerful. It's a 0 cost generic defense reaction that blocks for 3. That says, while this card is defending an attack with 2 or less power, when the combat chain closes, draw a card. The thing with this card, I only got to play with it once so far, but this does block a lot of Fi's yellow cards. And typically in limited, Fi does have to play some yellow cards, mainly the yellow head jabs. When you do block that all you got, with that all you got, you do get another card back that you can swing back at Fi. And I really like that against him. And another thing that's good with this card would be blocking Dromai's Aether Ash Rings. If you really just need to like filter through your hand, you can block the 1 power dragon and just draw another card to try and put back pressure on your opponent. Typically, it's not game breaking, but I think it is definitely better than a lot of random commons in the set.
Yeah, I think it's strong enough that you basically always want to be playing this card into, I think, Dromai and Fi if you have access to it, regardless of what hero you are. It working against the Phoenix Flame for Fi is like also pretty big, since they will Phoenix Flame you the majority of turns. So stopping a damage and then replacing itself, it's just a free life. So it's pretty solid.
Uh, any other cards?
Maybe the last time I want to talk about is Spreading Flames, mostly because this card is making big rounds in CC. So this is a Draconic Ninja card that is 3 power, 2 block, 1 cost with Go Again. And then it says all of your Draconic cards they get +1 attack if their base power is less than the number of Draconic chain links that you control. So with like the kind of combo Fi deck that's running around in CC and won the Calling Utrecht, I think this is a card that's on a lot of players' radar, and it reads as very powerful. In my experience in limited, like it's a pretty good card. It is a starter, but it's not that much stronger than like often this is basically just a leg tap. Like if you think about like you pitch a blue, you play this for 3, you play your Ember Blade for 3, and then you get like a +1 on your Phoenix Flame. Often it'll be like a leg tap. Sometimes you might get like a 5th power out of it if you have like a particularly potent turn. So I think it is like a solid card, and I would definitely play it in Fi, but it's not just gonna like run over the other player and take over the game the vast majority of the time. Although you probably, I can imagine a few turns where if there was a spreading flame in limited, it'd be pretty good. But in general, this card is like,
Yeah, yeah.
just like a solid playable, not a crazy bomb.
Particularly in limited, draft and sealed. The problem with this card is that it buffs the Phoenix Flames that you attack with, which makes it more appealing for the opponent to block the Phoenix Flame. So like they could, if you attack with Spreading Flame for 3, they can block it for 3. The Ember Blade for 3, block it for 3, and the Phoenix Flame for 2. And if they block that for 2, uh, you essentially turned your opponent's hand into like a perfect block situation more than getting over these breakpoints like you can do in CC.
Yeah. And I mean that's still okay because like you're getting 3 blocks out of your opponent for 2 cards, like a blue and your spreading flame. So it's still like a pretty good deal, but it's just it's really not that much stronger than like a leg tap. It's pretty comparable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's very replaceable in the deck with a common.
Mhm. Any so I think we've kind of covered like the cards, the heroes. Any kind of closing thoughts about sealed and uprising? Like
Yeah, I think the main point that we want to get out there would be the mythics in this set are mainly all traps. Don't get attached to the mythics you open in sealed, but look more at the common synergies with each hero and how powerful you can make each deck, rather than being allured by, oh, I can play a mythic dragon, or oh, I can play spreading flames, or even what's an Icelander, a mythic.
freezing point, maybe.
Yeah, freezing point, sure. Like these cards are not the reasons you should be in that deck, but this should be more from the commons. Like I'll be more happy to play Icelander if I opened 2 Aether Hails than if I were to open 2 Freezing Points. So I think what I want to say is a lot of the Majestics in the set pretty bad. Uh, you're looking for more common synergies to round out your deck essentially.
Yeah, and it's really kind of those things that we talked about for each of the heroes to prioritize. So maybe just to like sum that up again, for Fi, it's really those go again starters that have just like unconditional go again, especially the head jabs and leg taps at red because they fit in with the Ember Blade. For Dromai, you're looking for those red go again attacks, and you need the reds to pitch as well for her Ash generation and some
Hero ability.
dragons. Yeah, and then for Icelander, it's really about that critical mass of the blue non-attacks. So when you're evaluating your pool, I would separate into like what hero they fit in, and you could make a separate pile for the Draconic that can go in either Dromai or Phi, and then sort of like evaluate what each of those heroes look like and see what's possible. I would say that in general, I'd imagine you're going to wind up Phi majority of the time, and you're really looking for reasons to like be Icelander or reasons to be Dromai, and that would just be having like for Icelander that'd be like having the high density of blue non attacks, and for Dromai that would be maybe like a good mix of all those cards that Jay talked about, the red go agains, the dragons, the centipies. You really need a lot to come together. Anything else you would look at that might like draw you towards a hero besides sort of those commons that we highlighted?
Typically, the number of equipment you get to play would be another thing that can draw you into a hero. If you have like a hero that gets to play 4 pieces of equipment is much stronger than a hero that can only play that can play one. You can always have one because of Helios Miter, but 1 versus 4, that could be the difference between you winning the game and losing the game. So if you are a Phi deck that doesn't have any equipment, you might at least try and look at the other heroes that can play 4 equipments if possible.
Mhm.
But then again, Phi has the Ember Blade equipment, so that might just even be better than some Quell equipments.
Yeah, yeah. Phi really does come together often. Maybe on the topic of equipment, all the classes kind of have like two pieces of two like main types of equipment, one with arcane barrier and one with quell. In general, I find the quell equipment to be really good. Like Heatwave in Phi is usually always worth like 1 to 2 damage, and Silken Form in Dromai is worth a lot. Whereas the arcane barrier in those classes is still solid, but only really relevant into Dromai. Like the Tide Flipper's like ability to give a 2 power attack go again, or Dromai's stilettos being able to, what is it? If an attack gets broken, you can get your action point back for 3 resources. It's just like it never comes up. So those cards are really like EV for Icelander, and that's about it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually gained an action point back just because it's either too expensive or I just won't have another card to play after or attack with another after this.
Yeah, and
Um,
I haven't even seen it
still waiting for that
happen.
day.
I haven't even seen it happen on the other side of the table either. Like it just doesn't come up. Um,
Yeah, it really doesn't.
I guess
Oh,
the
speaking
one.
about stilettos,
Go ahead.
yeah, can I just yeah, I don't know if not everyone knows this interaction with stilettos and Icelander, but Icelander does have a sneaky way of getting around stilettos, where if Dromai attacks with a dragon, you can actually pop the dragon with like a arcane damage card, like a blue Aether
Hail.
Hail.
Yep.
Yeah, and if the dragon dies, there is a point in the game essentially where you can't actually use silent stilettos to gain the action point back if it's before the actual attack resolving on the dragon. It's a little bit hard to explain in the podcast, but
Yeah.
if you ask a local judge in your area or like your local group, they might be able to clarify a little bit on this. But essentially, if a player goes attack with this dragon, if you pop the dragon in response to the attack, they lose their action point and they can't use stilettos. So that
Yeah.
might be a edge you can gain somewhere someday.
Yeah, and I believe the step is called. I believe the point when you can respond to it, where the dragon technically hasn't attacked yet, is called the layer step. So if you want to be technical, you can say during the layer step, I will attack your dragon, and they won't be able to do the stilettos. So it can be relevant, but very very minor edge. Last equipment that I don't think that we talked about, but is very very good, is the Sash of Sandakai, which is the draconic equipment that both Dromai and Phi can play. It's a chess piece, and it says that if you can only activate the ability if you've played a red card, but if you have, you can activate a instant that destroys Sash of Sandakai, and you gain a resource. What do you think about Sash of Sandakai, Jay?
I think Sash is very, very, very good. It extends both Dromai and Phi's turns on turns where you do miss on your blues, particularly in Phi where you do play the maximum number of reds just for its damage output. When you need the extra resource for any reason, you can just pop the Sandakai, and if it's gonna get you 4 or 5 more damage, it's insane. Like there's been games where if they don't have it, I win, but they have it, so like I'm not even close to winning the game.
Yeah, and Sash might be. If I was opening a sealed pool, I think Sash of Sandakai might be the equipment I would be the most excited to see because it fits into Dromai as well as Phi, and also I think Phi comes together the most, and it's probably the strongest equipment in Phi. I think it's maybe a little bit stronger than Heatwave. You don't get a choice over which one you get to take. You're never going to have to make the decision, but um,
Hmm.
it's very very good and a big
Yes.
reason to be a draconic hero.
Yep. Yeah. It is. If you are playing sealed, you don't really get a choice of which cards you get, so you gotta play with what you got. That's why it's called limited.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up this episode?
Nope. I don't think so. I think we covered most of the things we just wanted to talk about for today.
Okay. So that's going to conclude this week's episode of On the Bauble. Thank you all for listening. For now, you can find us on YouTube and Spotify, but we'll be looking to branch out to more platforms soon. We're sort of just getting our feet wet with this first episode, though. We're your hosts, Yuki and Jay. You can find me on Twitter at Yuki Lee Bender, and you can find my articles on redriotgames.ca. Jay's currently not active on social media, but we'll see if we can maybe encourage him as the podcast gets going and grows here. Thank you so much for listening, and please like, comment, and subscribe to help us be searchable on YouTube. That's all for this episode, and goodbye for now.
Oh, let's talk about nationals. Let's talk about 2021 nationals. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay, so a little bit about myself. Uh so in 2021 Canadian Nationals, I got ninth place in the event. And obviously, as you guys know, Yuki Lee Bender, 2021 national champion, won the event with her like disgusting Lexi deck. Just preyed on everyone's Briars list that was trying to like play the best deck in the format. But the thing I want to talk about here is the reason it didn't make the top cut for top 8 is in round was it 7 or 6, Yuki, on day 1? I think it was
It must
did
have
we
been
play 8
7. It
rounds?
was CC. It was CC, so it must have been 7.
Okay, so was it 7 rounds day 1 or 6 rounds day 1?
I
8
don't
rounds.
know.
It was 3
Some
rounds
number
of
of rounds. 9
it was
rounds.
3
It was
rounds of
9
draft,
rounds.
9
It was
rounds day
9
1.
rounds. It was gross.
Okay, so it was round 7. Yeah. So on
Yeah.
round 7 of the Nationals, I play against Yuki. And we had a super close game. And then there was one turn where I don't play around Lightning Press. And she Lightning Pressed me basically out of the game. Like she got some triggers off her arrows, and I had like totally threw me off the game. And
Yeah.
I lost that game.
Yeah, I think it was on a fused frost lock, and Jay committed some equipment to block out the frost lock, and then I put the lightning press over the top, which just time walked him, like took his entire turn. And it's very hard to win the game when you give up your equipment and you still lose your whole turn.
Yeah. And then so I end up losing that game. And then fast forward until round 12. So this is the last round of the Swiss. And this was Tales of Aria draft. And in round 12, I am playing no other than 2021 national champion Yuki Lee Bender again. And there was a point in the game where I am playing Oldham and draft, and Yuki is playing Lexi again. And I have a Glacial Footsteps in hand, and I think 3 blues. One of it's a nice card, so I can fuse the Glacial, and Yuki's at like 3 life or 4 life. Some Glacial Footsteps will kill her, like if I can fuse it. And on this turn where I have this, Yuki attacks me with an arrow, and I am at a life total where if she has red Lightning Press, I am basically dead. And I tank for about 5 minutes on this turn. I know you're not supposed to do this, but this was the last turn of the game essentially, and Yuki let me. Thanks, Yuki, for that.
We had lots of time on the clock, so it was all right.
Yeah, we did. But man, I just essentially screamed at her to be like, "Do not have red lightning press this turn, please. Just one time, do not have red lightning press." And then I said, "No block," and and then from her hand, she just like smiles and just slams the red lightning press. And from then on, people from my locals just like talk about red lightning press all the time and how it destroyed me out of the top 8 of nationals, of the first nationals.
Yeah. After all
And
this, Jay wound up ninth place, just
yeah,
narrowly missing on breakers, and that was the winning.
yeah, yeah. It's actually. I don't know if I won the game, if Yuki still makes top eight. It
Probably not.
was
Well,
you're
maybe. It's
you're
hard to say how
ninth,
the
right? Like,
breakers go. Yeah.
yeah. I think on the first breakers you're either ninth or eighth, but we don't know. So yeah, that's just how that game goes, and this is why I don't have any notable things to my name yet. Okay, I think that was a good story.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, and good night, everyone. Bye bye.